Welcome back everybody to more Warhammer lore. Today we will be covering Morathi, the Hag Sorceress of Graan. To cover Morathi's story, we will have to cross paths with Malekith's story quite a bit, as all dark elf lore in general derives from these two beings. So I will be trying to focus more on Morathi's perspective instead of Malekith's or other events that have happened. So this will be a very focused video on Morathi's various deeds throughout the world, and I probably won't cover everything. Specifically, I won't be covering the end times because that's really long and drawn out. She was a very important character, but if you want information on that, you can always consult the Lexiconum, or there's various other books. You could even read the end times novels. So with that in mind, let's get into Morathi. Morathi, the Hag Sorceress of Graan, and first of the Hag Queens, is the mother of Malekith and widow of Aenarion the Defender, the first Phoenix King of Ulthuan. She's a powerful magic user and possibly the creator of the Wind of Dar, or dark magic as we know it. It is said that her magical prowess could rival that of Nagash, Teglis of Ulthuan, and even Tzeentch's Lords of Change. She has made many disturbing pacts with demons and gods, and is said to be capable of unleashing the terrible power of chaos on anyone who displeases her. Morathi's story begins long ago, during the time when chaos was loosed upon the world in an unchecked maelstrom. The Elves all lived in Ulthuan at the time, and were being butchered by the demon hordes wholesale until the arrival of Aenarion, whom would be known as Aenarion the Defender, and given the title of Phoenix King after passing through Asuryan's flame in recognition of his god. He was a mighty warrior, and no elf to this day is said to be a match for him in bow, spear, or sword. With Aenarion's leadership, the Elves began to rally, and he took the Everqueen, the former ruler of Ulthuan, as his wife, and they had 2 children. Sadly, things did not go well for Aenarion, as both his wife and children were taken from him by the demons of chaos. His wife's body was found, but his children were missing and presumed dead. With this blow, Aenarion went to the Blighted Isle and entered the Shrine of Cain and drew the Widowmaker, the Spear of Vengeance, Sword of Cain, the God Slayer. It was an accursed weapon, and the moment Aenarion drew it from the altar, he doomed both himself and his line. With the sword in hand, he slew every demon before him, and nearly held back the chaos tides single-handedly. It is at this time that Morathi finally makes her appearance. One day, Aenarion brings Morathi to his court, much to the surprise of the nobles of Naggaroth. The king claimed that he saved her from a cult of Slaanesh worshippers and demons. Now, in hindsight, Morathi may or may not have been a member of this cult. She is known to be nearly unnaturally attractive, in a way quite similar to many Slaaneshi demons. In my own opinion, I believe that Morathi was in fact the leader of this cult, and turned her misfortune of being discovered by Aenarion into an opportunity to not only save her life, but also attain more power and prestige. As she is known to covet power in all ways, craving it, it is also possible that she simply bewitched the Phoenix King, as many legends suggest, but no one objected openly when Aenarion took her as his wife. Morathi gave birth to Malekith, whom would later be known as the Witch King. Aenarion took him as his heir, and then through Morathi's influence, the court of the Phoenix King began to change. Art, music, and poetry, all things in elf values, were brushed aside in favor of hunting, dueling, and other blood sports, which became common in the court of Aenarion. And it was here that the most proficient warriors gathered to hone their skills in daily battles against encroaching demons. Naggaroth became a land obsessed with war and death, and Calidor, Dragon Tamer, a longtime friend of Aenarion, departed to find his own kingdom in the south. Much to the anger of Aenarion, Morathi spoke to Malekith and taught him the secrets of rulership and diplomacy, even as Aenarion taught his son his unmatched skill at arms and gift of command. Malekith soon became one of Aenarion's most deadly warriors, and learned spellcraft from his mother, so that he could wield fireballs and prophecy as easily as a sword and spear. It was then that Calidor enacted the Great Vortex, and Aenarion rode out to defend him. After slaying the greater demons of chaos, the first Phoenix King is thought to have perished from his wounds, but not before returning the Widowmaker to the altar of Cain. The body of both the Phoenix King and his dragon were never found. At this point in time, Morathi has been reigning as Queen of Ulthuan and ruler of Naggaroth. It took some time for the Council of Princes to gather and to decide on who would be Aenarion's natural successor. And in this time, rumors of Aenarion's former court were beginning to circulate around Ulthuan. Tales of violence and decadence, no doubt mostly were true, but many of the princes did not wish to have Aenarion's natural heir as their king, and feared that he may have been tainted by the darkness of this court after his drawing of the Sword of Cain. Morathi, desperate to keep her power, had decided that her son Malekith should be the next Phoenix King, and many others did agree with her. It was then that Durthu, the eldest of the ancients, brought forth Aenarion's daughter. She had survived the demons by being spirited away by the treemen through the wold roots to Athel Loren. With her return, she took up the mantle of Everqueen, and since Malekith would be a half-brother to her, many who opposed his rule claimed that he could not be king simply because he could not marry his sister, as was the custom of the Phoenix King. Morathi was furious, claiming that she was an impostor and how the other princes were simply envious of Malekith's birthright. Her dark magic swirled about her, and the warriors under her command readied their weapons. It was only the level-headed nature of Malekith that kept her fury in check. After accepting the Council of Prison's decision, it was in fact her son that first pledged his allegiance to Belshazzar of Tiranoc, who would become the next Phoenix King. Morathi left the meeting in disgust and returned to Naggaroth. Malekith, having not been crowned, decided to visit the new elven colonies founded in the Old World, and left his mother as ruler of Naggaroth in his stead. It is in this time that I believe Morathi, in an attempt to usurp the throne and crown her son, started the cults of pleasure. Of course, in her eyes, it was all for her son's best interest, and that these cults were spread. She would utilize them as spies and as a cancerous force to challenge Belshazzar's rule through defiance. It is possible that Morathi never even stopped being a follower of Slaanesh, even after becoming queen, but it was in this time of peace that she capitalized on the elven people. For many of the elves sought to escape the bitter grief that the Chaos Incursion had left within their lives. In temples filled with beating drums, haunting pipes, and narcotic vapors, they danced and feasted and sang blasphemous praises. Belshazzar seemed powerless to quell the growing unrest in his realm. The pleasure cults were gaining more sway with every passing season. The unknown but foul heart of the cults was Naggaroth, but Belshazzar was hesitant to act against the lands of Aenarion's people. Princes caught in the grip of the cults began to mutter that Belshazzar was weak and an usurper of the Phoenix throne. When Malekith arrived in Ulthuan, he was heralded as a savior. Belshazzar knew where the cults were emanating from, but until now he had no real way of challenging them. Thus he asked Malekith to deal with him, and the prince vowed to hunt down the cults and exterminate them, claiming that no kingdom would be beyond his wrath, not even Naggaroth. When Malekith discovered that his mother was the chief architect of the cults, he renounced her and ordered that she be imprisoned upon her capture, along with thousands of her misguided disciples. Nobody was above Malekith's scrutiny, from the lowest farmer to the most vaunted prince. Those cultists who surrendered were sent to the castles of Naggaroth to be released from their delusions, yet it seemed nothing short of outright war would quell the rise of the decadent cults. Indeed, after making siege and taking the capital of Naggaroth, Malekith discovered Morathi waiting for him in the throne room. It was here that she revealed to Malekith the overarching plan for the cults, and how they could be of use to him. Morathi was taken back to Tiranoc in chains, and was held as a hostage in Belshazzar's own castle. She had secured her safety from the executioner's axe by asking her son to beg for her mercy, and so he did, and Belshazzar was forced to let her live, but as his prisoner indefinitely. Unbeknownst to him, Malekith was secretly meeting with Morathi during her imprisonment, and in fact the cults had surged forward even more than before, with the Hag Queen utilizing her dark magic to commune with her followers, as well as her son secretly using his newfound powers to persecute the cult members, but was in fact rounding up more members from Morathi, as well as disposing of an unwanted opposition. Finally, all of her scheming came to a head, as Malekith finally made his bid for the throne. He killed the Phoenix King by poisoning him, and then called for the Council of Princes to gather at the Shrine of Aenarion, where they would need to decide on the next Phoenix King. I will be going into greater detail on many of these events involving Malekith when I do his own video, as I said earlier. So needless to say, he had nearly all of the princes slain and walked into the sacred flames. More surprise to him, Aenarion found him unworthy and proceeded to burn not only his flesh but his very soul. He did manage to throw himself from the flames, and his presumed corpse was taken by his knights as they fled back to Naggaroth. Around the same time as the convening of the Council of Princes, Morathi, having been told of Belshazzar's death, simply waltzed out of the castle. No one stopped her or gave chase. In fact, a retinue of Naggarothi knights were waiting on her outside of the fortress. From Tiranoc, she traveled to Naggaroth to take up her post as queen and soon to be mother of the Phoenix King. A messenger reached her with news of Malekith at the shrine, and in shock she made haste to retrieve his corpse. To her surprise, when his retinue brought his body to her, he actually whispered something to her, and through misty eyes she began to work her magics to save his life. It would take many years to hear Malekith through the use of blasphemous rites and demon pacts, where Morathi was once spied to be making a deal with one of the infamous Lord of Change. Of course, Morathi has no desire to actually deliver on any of these bargains that she's made, which one would assume involves her mortal soul, but the most cunning scheme she put into place was her seduction of the former head of the priests of the Temple of Vol, where she used not only her physical gifts, but uses of the priest's own desire to forge more powerful weapons and armor. She convinced him to forge a new set of armor through the use of their newfound knowledge of dwarven runes and her dark magic, of course. This would also take time, and Morathi had to prepare for her son's rebirth. Everywhere the cults sprang up in even greater numbers, and each individual kingdom was doing all it could to eradicate the cultists, while being asked at the same time to provide men and troops to face the Naggarothian battle. A new Phoenix King would be needed to bring the troops of the Elven kingdoms to muster in any kind of order, and Morathi intended to not let them elect one. Imric of Caledor was one of the few princes not present during the slaughter at the Shrine of Aenarion, and was now being crowned Phoenix King. Unfortunately, he was currently hunting in Trace in the mountains, where it would take quite a while to locate him. Knowing this, Morathi summoned the best assassins the now up-and-coming cult of Cain had to offer. Through her magic, she cursed the assassins with a vision of the prince, and a terrible mind-wrecking pain that would only diminish the closer they came to their target. The assassins then hunted Caledor, where much to Morathi's displeasure, they were slain before they could finish the job. However, this was not the only ploy at her disposal, and through the proposition of power and magic beyond their dreams, Morathi seduced nearly half of the mages of Safri to her side, causing a great civil war amongst the kingdom. The dark sorcerers were ultimately defeated at great cost, and were forced to flee back to Naggaroth. It was through these mages and the stolen hammer of Vol that the former priest Hotek finally finished the black rune-etched armor that would bring Malekith back into power. Morathi, using her own dark knowledge to support the rite, watched on in joy as her son lifted himself from it with his own strength from the forge and took his rightful place at the head of the armies Morathi had prepared for him. The war lasted hundreds of years with no victor in sight. Morathi during this time was seeking even stronger magics and descended upon Avalorn, the realm of the Everqueen. It appears that she wished to somehow extract the divine magics of the land and despoil them, either some wish from her possible demonic patrons, or simply because she believed that she could bend this magic to her will and become all the stronger for it. Of course, the Everqueen was not defenseless. It called upon the woodland spirits and treemen that still remained in Avalorn to defend it. Morathi, riding her dark Pegasus, slew a dragon and its prince, and wounded 2 others before being pushed back by the Everqueen, and forced to abandon her troops and retreat or face death. Fortunately for Morathi, even though she could not harness the power for herself, she felt the magics grow weak, as the despoiled land left in the Dark Elves' wake, and the Everqueen's last spell had drained it, and indeed it would never be the same again. After many more skirmishes, Imric was forced to face Malekith in battle, and it seemed as though the Witch King would be victorious once and for all. Morathi, of course, supported her son in the battle, taking on the head of the Safri mages in combat and nearly killing the old fool. But Malekith's dragon was killed from under him, and to his surprise, his armor was not enough to protect him from the Phoenix Guard, which promptly surrounded him, stopping him from taking Imric's head. The weapons of the Blessed of Aenarion seemed in a small part to reignite the burns he received at the temple, and he was forced to flee. Morathi and Malekith regrouped in Naggaroth, both frustrated and desperate. Unfortunately, their army had been lost once Malekith had fled, but the High Elves' army was equally decimated. Seeing a great opportunity, this is when Morathi suggested the unthinkable, and Malekith agreed. He needed an army, and would do anything the Hagwing suggested to claim one, including unbinding the Great Vortex. It's unknown if Morathi believed this would work the way they planned, or if this was just another ploy of one of her many patrons at this point. It is likely through hubris that she actually believed that between her and Malekith and her dark coven of sorcerers, that they could in fact enslave a horde of demons and control them. The idea was simple. unbind the Vortex, enslave the demons spilling out of it, and rebind the Vortex after they were done with them. If they failed, the world would burn, but that was a risk they were willing to take. Luckily for the rest of the world, as the Dark Elves began to unbind the Vortex, a great power was awoken. Morathi felt it, and immediately knew that they had failed. Kalidor Dragon Tamer and his mages awoke from their stasis, and began assisting the High Elves in reforging the Vortex. However, the magical backlash of the unbinding and rebinding of the Vortex was stupendous, and a literal tidal wave fell upon Ulthuan, engulfing Naggaroth and Tiranoc. Thousands perished, but Morathi had thought of this outcome, and through dark magic had instructed her followers to cast spells upon the fortresses of Naggaroth, which instead of being smashed by the waves, were ripped from their footings and spirited onto open ocean. These would later become known as the Black Arcs. From here, the Dark Elves traveled north and west across the desolate ocean to a place that would forever be known as Naggaroth, the land of chill, and home of the Druchii. A few of the beach fortresses soon became the sprawling cities of the Dark Elves, from which many of their raids on the lesser races would originate. And many years after Malekith decided enough time had passed and mustered his forces to retake Ulthuan. While Malekith fought upon Ulthuan, control of Naggaroth rested with his mother, Morathi. Now steeped in the blackest of magic, Morathi sought further means to increase her mystical power. She sent expeditions into the realms of chaos to the north, tasking them to seek out artifacts of the dark gods, and to observe the ever-changing miasma of chaos energy. Few of these expeditions returned, and none came back to Naggaroth unscathed. Too great were the perils for Morathi to venture there herself, and so she commanded a great tower to be built in the north of Naggaroth, from which she could personally look upon the energy of the gods. Grond was founded. The North Tower, the citadel, was named. It was here Morathi founded the Covenant of Dark Sorceresses. She performed hideous tests of magical and mental strength to find the most promising young seers and witches from amongst the Dark Elves. Many did not survive. Those that did were hardened by their trials, as bitter and devoted to the pursuit of black magic as their mistress. Morathi set this coven of sorceresses to studying the realms of chaos, gazing into its mesmerizing, mind-shredding depths to discern its secrets and learn of what had passed and would come to pass. With her dark oracles to aid her, the path of the futures were laid out before Morathi like an insane map, and with this knowledge she charted the course of destiny for her son. Yet for all her foresight and cunning, Morathi could not locate all of the strands of fate that would lead to the ultimate victory over Ulthuan. It was during this time that her Dark Covenant began using magic to enhance their beauty through dark magic, to the displeasure of Atharti, the elven god of pleasure and beauty. For this slight, Atharti, who is vain beyond measure and suffers no mortal competition, stripped the upstart mortals of their beauteous forms and caged them in pain-racked, serpentine bodies. Even this punishment she deemed insufficient, and so she reduced their minds to be little more than those of beasts. Atharti left only one sliver of awareness of her victims, enough that they might always remember that with torment the beauty and power they had once possessed. Morathi alone escaped unscathed from the goddess, because she did not need dark magic to enhance her beauty, and therefore, not being one to challenge a god, thanked Atharti for punishing her fool apprentices and began recruiting more witches for her coven. Malekith's next invasion of Ulthuan ended in failure, as Morathi watched through her dark magic. With the blighted isle now in High Elf hands, Kalidor now victoriously set sail to return to Lothran. His departure was seen by the scrying spells of Morathi, and she called down a storm to sink the High Elf fleet. Most of the ships survived the battering winds and waves, but the fleet was scattered, and Kalidor's vessel was sent far off course. Guided by Morathi, Malekith's pirates swiftly intercepted and boarded the Phoenix King's ship. Knowing their intent was to capture him, Kalidor cast himself into the sea in full armor, escaping the torturous revenge of Malekith. Thus ended the reign of Kalidor, the First, but his death did not end the war. Not for 5,000 years had the Dark Elves known any peace. After the war, many new cities were founded in Naggaroth by the returning army leaders and officers, too scared to go back to face the judgments of Malekith at their perceived failure. Malekith at first was simply going to annihilate these new cities, but Morathi saw an opportunity and convinced him to stay his hand, and so Morathi secretly steered the course of the Dark Elves through her council with Malekith for many centuries. It was during this time a resurgence of the pleasure cults swept through the land of Chill, and even the home of Malekith, Naggaroth, was rife with blood and sacrifices. But one sect in particular rose to dominate all others. They were the cultists of Cain, the god of murder, and their bloody sacrifices made a great spectacle for the Dark Elves. The fumes from their pyres swathed the city of the Witch King, and bloodthirsty mobs ran rampant through the streets, killing and maiming in mindless bursts of violence. Rather than quell this excess, Malekith sought to focus the devotion of these elves and turn it to his own ends. The Witch King proclaimed himself a mortal incarnation of Cain, his merciless instrument in the realm of this living world. Malekith swore undying devotion to the Lord of Murder in the shrine of Naggaroth, and poured a goblet of his divine blood into the braziers where the witch elves burnt the hearts of their sacrifices. Morathi again aided her son, and gifted the witch elves of Cain with the sacred cauldrons of blood. No one knows for sure where the cauldrons originated. One day, Morathi simply appeared with them, claiming that they were gifts from Cain to the devoted. It is impossible to know for sure, but I would think that these gifts come from an entirely different deity because of the effects they have on the hag queens that use them. You see, the hag queens who led the cults bathed in the blood of their sacrifices and rejuvenated their bodies, as did Morathi herself. Unlike Morathi, who kept the innermost secrets of the cauldrons for herself, the hag queen's revivification was only temporary. As the months passed, they began to age once more, and needed to bathe again to reclaim their beauty. For decades, the most powerful witch elves indulged themselves in this bloody manner, realizing too late that Morathi had ensnared them with an addiction to eternal beauty. The hag queen Helebron, leader of the cult, once refused her ritual bathing, but became so decrepit and age-worn that her loyal followers had to sustain her with their own blood until she repented and bathed in a cauldron once more. She has been defiant of Morathi ever since, but ultimately it is Morathi who controls the fate of the Hag Queens, not Helebron. Morathi received word that the dwarves and elves were coming close to a formal alliance, and fearing whom their first target would be, advised Malekith on how to sabotage both enemies and bring himself closer to the Phoenix throne. Malekith ordered assassins to attack Dalwi trade caravans and leave behind evidence of High Elf treachery. This worked better than they hoped, and not only had the alliance been severed, but the two races went to war for hundreds of years, weakening the other into a pitiful state that they would never truly recover from. Thus, under Morathi's guidance, another war for Ulthuan was started, and ultimately lost once again. Malekith decided to focus on rebuilding his shattered armies, and strengthen the 6 cities that now made up Naggaroth. Direct war against the High Elves would serve no purpose, Malekith realized. Outright aggression would only stir them from their introverted decline, while the Witch King could use more subtle means to defeat his foes from within. Advised by Morathi, Malekith poured support into the many cults and sects that the Dark Elves participated in, openly supporting high priests and priestesses like Helebron, Agathir, and Karathi. The cult's ceremonies became even more extravagant and widely extended. Luxuries were heaped upon the most dedicated followers of the Dark Elves' sinister gods. From amongst the ranks of these fervent worshippers, the Witch King selected the most intelligent and devoted, and they were sent to learn the arts of subterfuge and spying from the assassins of Cain. When they were ready, these agents traveled one at a time by hidden routes to the shores of Ulthuan. They blended in with the High Elves and assumed normal lives as carpenters and smiths, as fanners and poets. All the while they began to spread their poisonous beliefs, and the ancient cults of pleasure began to grow again. This time the cults were insidious and subtle, daring none of the flamboyant rituals that they exposed them into the time of Belshazzar. Century by century, generation by generation, the hidden sects flourished, a dark canker at the heart of Ulthuan that remained unseen by those who reigned. This was a long process spanning hundreds of years, and Malekith appeared to be losing his edge for battle. His desires to claim the Phoenix throne appeared to be slipping away. This was unacceptable to Morathi, and decided that something would have to be done. She attempted to ask the god Cain to reinvigorate her son by making large sacrifices to him daily, but this appeared to not work. So Morathi decided to start a rebellion in one of the many cities of Naggaroth. The Witch King quickly quelled this uprising, brutally and without remorse. However, his lasting hate did not rise to the surface. It was around this time that messengers from Athel Loren made contact with Malekith, and they brought news of Alisara, the Witch King's long-lost wife from his adventuring days, whom wished to see him. Malekith tried to hide this information from Morathi, but her spies were always watching, and she found out nonetheless. This was a terrible turn of events, because in his current slump, if Malekith came together with Alisara, he may decide to forget about his desire to claim the Phoenix throne, and Morathi would not be denied her prize, especially at the hands of some backwoods she-elf. She decided to travel to Ulthuan under a glamour, and ensnared a high elf prince. She used the prince to ambush the wood elf retinue guarding Alisara, and the high elves, having their perception warped by Morathi, believed that they were in fact dark elves, and slaughtered every wood elf they could find. Alisara was murdered, and Morathi, using her dark magic, concealed all traces of her influence, and Malekith was none the wiser. Of course, when he found out that the High Elves had murdered his long-lost wife, he snapped out of his rut and immediately called his war council to begin preparations for the next invasion. Morathi was very pleased up until a horde of wood elves appeared from seemingly nowhere to assail her city. It turns out that Alisara was the sister of Ariel, the incarnation of Isha, and queen of the wood elves, and a powerful magic user whom had been searching for the one responsible for her sister's death. Morathi's defenses were cast aside at the hands of Orion and the Wild Hunt, but before the Avatar of Kurnos could slay her, Morathi sensed a dark magic influencing Ariel and made an offer. To break Morathi's concealment spells, Ariel had been forced to resort to dark magic, and in fact it had taken a hold on her, slowly corrupting her being. Morathi offered her knowledge of dark magic in exchange for her life. Of course, she would never reveal all of her secrets, but some should be enough to keep her alive. Ariel agreed, much to the displeasure of Orion, and the Wood Elves left. When Malekith found out about the Wood Elves and what had transpired, he very nearly killed his mother and had her imprisoned while he thought of an adequate end to her treacherous life. However, after further thinking about it, he came to his mother's cell and acknowledged that she had snapped him out of his lackadaisical spout, and decided that she was not to be executed. If the Witch King could have seen the smile across his mother's face as he walked away, he surely would have smite her right then and there. But Morathi, careful as usual, concealed her pleasure. Back in Ulthuan, although Malekith's cultists were wreaking havoc, they were not unopposed. When Bel-Khorhadish had built the White Tower of Hoeth, he founded a company of mystical guardians to protect it, the Swordmasters of Hoeth. Unknown to either the Phoenix King or Malekith, the Swordmasters were waging a silent war against the pleasure cults, and the conflict came to a climax in Lothran itself, when fighting erupted onto the streets of the city between Naggarothi agents and the warriors of the Swordmasters, during which the cultists were all slain, forced to abandon some of their bolder plans by the persecution of the Swordmasters. The cults of excess faded back into High Elf society and continued their secretive work. Even as cultists were uncovered and executed, more agents were dispatched from Naggaroth to swell the ranks of the cults. Some of these were discovered and slain as soon as they landed on the coast. Others slipped through the guard of the High Elves and established themselves as their predecessors had done. At some point, Morval, the reigning Phoenix King at the time, decided to take the fight to the Dark Elves. However, Morathi saw everything leading up to this and warned her son of his encroaching threat. The Dark Elves were ready and crushed the High Elf fleet, which then kicked off another war for Ulthuan, a war that once again ended in a Dark Elf defeat. After this, the Dark Elves turned their eyes away from Ulthuan and began raiding the Far East and many other lands, rebuilding their strength and numbers, until finally another attack on Ulthuan was at hand, except a massive chaos army of savages and monsters had gathered on the borders of Naggaroth, and Malekith did not feel he could leave his lands undefended to take the home of the High Elves. It was Morathi who turned this dire situation into an opportunity. In a great caravan, 100 laden wagons drawn by 1,000 cold ones, the hag sorceress led an expedition into the north. With her she took 10,000 slaves, the riches of distant kings, and a courtier of sorceresses. Messengers were sent to the east and west, declaring that the Queen of the Elves would handsomely reward any who would fight for her. The tribes met Morathi with suspicion, but once they saw her cold beauty, they were utterly bewitched. Pleasured by concubines and given gifts of gold, silver, and gems, the chiefs of the tribe quickly swore an oath of fealty to the Elf Queen. The same happened at the next encampment, and the next, and the next. As word spread, tribes traveled hundreds of leagues to seek out Morathi, and she created a palace of frozen ice and jet black rock to welcome her visitors. She lavished lustful attentions on the tribesmen and gave them jewelry and slaves. This continued for many months, until she had mustered a horde of tribesmen tens of thousands strong. A year earlier, these vicious warriors had been intent on pillaging the cities of the Dark Elves. Now they were pawns of Morathi, ready to fight for the Witch King. This next invasion of Ulthuan was the most successful yet, and Morathi's Northmen proved to be excellent distractions for the High Elves, while the Dark Elves set about capturing and securing land and treasure. Unfortunately, there was a resurgence of new heroes amongst the High Elves, mainly a set of twins, Tyrion and Teclis. They would in fact be the two to face the Witch King in the final battle of this war. Morathi watched from afar the carnage unfold, until she spied Prince Tyrion doing battle with a Cainite assassin named Poisonblade, Malekith's champion. Morathi's breath was caught in her throat as she saw not Tyrion, but Aenarion reborn, for the twins are the descendants of Aenarion, born from his missing son, and Tyrion apparently had the look of his grandfather. As Poisonblade was about to kill Tyrion, Morathi used her magics to divert the strike, saving his life, and the hero slew the Dark Elf champion. This forced Malekith to enter the fray, and a great sorceress duel between Malekith and Teclis unfolded, resulting in Teclis unleashing a spell that reignited the flames of Asuryan across his body. All Morathi could do was watch in horror as Malekith used his sorceress gifts to spirit himself away into the realms of chaos where the flames would abate. After their king abandoned them, the Dark Elf armies shattered. And shortly after, Morathi captured Tyrion, and though he was not Aenarion as she thought, with the loss of her son and no hopes of finding him, she decided that through her dark magic she would mold Tyrion into Aenarion and make him love her. However, old rivalries would come to thwart this plan, as an emissary of Hellebron, the Hag Queen, unshackled the High Elf, allowing him to escape, for she deemed it better to have him abroad than in the clutches of Morathi, especially if she could in fact force him to love her. Before he fled, Tyrion ran into the Hag Sorceress and nearly killed her, except in a last-ditch effort to save her life, she kissed the prince, and it is said that in his stupor, Morathi made her escape. Morathi was distraught over the loss of Tyrion, and then began to search for her son in any way possible. She decided the best way to get him back would be to make large sacrifices to Cain to deliver him back to her people. But this didn't work, and so she had heard of the great beasts that roamed the land of Lustria, and put a bounty on the heads of any lizardmen, claiming the great power and wealth would be bestowed on whoever could deliver a great sacrifice to her to appease Cain. Vast armies of Dark Elves headed south into Lustria, and brought back all manner of lizardmen and dinosaurs with which they sacrificed, but the sacrifices never seemed to be enough to appease the Lord of Murder. It wasn't until after 12 years that a Slan mage priest was captured and essentially lobotomized through the use of poison and brought to Morathi. It was after making this hefty sacrifice to Cain that she received a vision and knew that she would just have to wait for her son to be delivered to her. It was soon after this that the body of Malekith was found not far from the northern watchtowers of Naggaroth. Of course, being a diligent mother, Morathi nursed him back to health over the course of a year. However, Malekith was not the same after returning from the realms of chaos. He would not speak on what happened in that realm of the ruinous powers, but when he was found, a great horn was protruding from his side, and he was on the verge of death. After fully recovering, he commenced his raids on the allies of the Azur, and another campaign for Ulthuan was being planned. Morathi, being fascinated with the Slan that had been brought to her as a sacrifice, found a new calling in delving into the secrets of the Lizardmen, as they were very potent magics, and a mystery that Morathi could not resist. To this end, she made a shaky alliance with Luther Harkon, an insane vampire whom has had a long history with the Lizardmen of Lustria, and the two have been raiding temples and researching the history of the old ones ever since. And with that, we finish Morathi's story as to where I see it in the Total War Warhammer timeline. Now, moving on to some of her magical equipment and abilities. Morathi rides a dark Pegasus known as Sulafet, which has been confirmed to be a possible mount for her in Total War Warhammer. She also has access to the lores of magic in death, shadow, and dark magic. I would assume she will probably only have dark magic in the Total War Warhammer, but they could give her a combined lore tree with spells from multiple lores, like we are seeing with Lord Mazdamundi. She also has a skill known as Enchanting Beauty in the tabletop, similar to some Slaaneshi units that would essentially translate over as a melee debuff, as her beauty seems to distract her attackers, making them less likely to hit her. She also has 2 magical items, the first being her staff, which acts as a kind of spear or lance in melee, called Heartrender, which increases her magic and strength. And she also has a sword called the Dark Sword, which has the ability to enfeeble her foes, essentially lowering their melee defense. From a campaign perspective, I'm hoping that we get Morathi as not only a powerful caster, but also as the leader of the Cult of Pleasure, which I'm hoping we get that as well. And maybe there will be some kind of mechanic involving the cult and sowing seeds of revolt throughout Ulthuan and the High Elves, and maybe even through the other races. That would be pretty cool. She will, of course, be our caster hero, or caster legendary lord, for the Dark Elves, and I hope you learned something about her today. She is steeped in a lot of mystery, and appears to have close affiliations with demons of both Slaanesh and Tzeentch, which in the modern lore they kind of attributed that to her affiliation with Hekarti and Itharti, the elven gods of magic, dark magic specifically, and of pleasure, which we spoke on earlier. For information on them, check out my Elven Pantheon video. But getting back to Morathi, she's done a lot of deals with demons in the past. Who's to say if she still worships them or not? No way to know. She's a very interesting character, one of the key female characters in the lore. She's beautiful beyond recognition, whether that be a blessing of Slaanesh or maybe Itharti. I'm not sure. That is one of her most obvious traits, but she's also a powerful caster, and she's actually not bad in melee combat. She's decent, not great, but decent, and hopefully that translates into the Warhammer game whenever it comes out. That's all I've got on Morathi. Leave a comment down below if I missed something or got something wrong. I don't think I did, but it's possible. Like I said earlier, I will not be covering the end times. It's too complicated. Maybe I'll do videos on the end times later. But until then, that's going to be it, guys. Thanks for watching. I enjoy all the support I'm getting from all of my subscribers, anybody viewing this content. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.